Hello there, it's Josh here from Racing to Profit. In this video, the first of a couple, I'm going to quickly whiz through Cheltenham's results from last week from the Cheltenham Festival, with the aim of touching on a few horses which caught my eye and kind of went into my notebook, and I may be keeping a note of moving forwards, as well as some other observations that you may or may not find useful in any future race analysis, whether for the festival or other big races, and things we can kind of learn, I suppose, from various different performances and winners and other bits and pieces. And then after I've whizzed through a few kind of eye catchers and different bits and pieces like that for day 1 and 2, I'm then going to just take a quick look at the record of mares at the Cheltenham Festival in the last couple of years, and specifically in kind of when they rock up in mixed sex races, including handicaps, because there's some interesting stats now which may well confirm a trend. We shall see. So yes, that's the aim of this video. I'm going to start with the Supreme Novices Hurdle, obviously won in impressive fashion, but I appreciate it. Blue Lord, I think, would be the one to take forward from this, especially if we're thinking of handicaps further down the line. I think this horse, I mean, obviously he fell, so fingers crossed he got up, but obviously you never know how it may affect them mentally on the next start or two. He was going to be a well-beat second, but was going to have the rest of them beaten, I think. Since he's come over from France, he's always been a bit headstrong and a bit keen. It may be no surprise that his best performance, his only winning performance since coming over here, let's say, has been in a big field. That may be something important. He was still keen and a bit buzzy through this race, and may well have wanted them to go even quicker. I think better ground may see him a good effect. He looks, he travels well. He looks like he's got a bit of pace about him. Clearly, softer ground isn't a problem either, but he's got form now with Appreciate. He's got form with Bob Ollinger, who's obviously very impressive at the festival also. This horse has ability. This was a career best Racing Post rating. They'd have judged that on before he fell. I'm not sure if his mark or his rating's been put up at all, but whatever happens, I think when he hits a big field, Willie may well think he can get a graded novice win out of him this season, but I wouldn't be surprised if he stays within 145 to the low 150s. That could well be exploited, as always with any horse who's run well or gone well to a point, especially in Cheltenham novice and graded races, and those that are kind of lower rated, keeping an eye on them in future handicaps and future festival handicaps. Like I said, some of them can be transformed again with a slight drop in class, obviously, but a bigger field, stronger pace, better ground, etc. So Blue Lords are one I'll keep an eye on. It'll be interesting, fascinating to see what Willie does with him, but that mark is definitely worth exploiting at some point. And I think he would settle better in a big field, kind of big cavalry charge. So that's the kind of horse I will keep an eye on from Cheltenham. He looked, maybe a flatter track would be his thing as well. I don't know if Willie and the owners would think about running an Aintree. It may be too soon, I'm not sure. But yeah, one to keep an eye on for me. Let's go to the Arkle. A very good bit of placing, as it turned out, by Colin Tizzard. A general point, a few of his ran fairly well at the meeting. And is it going to be a case of them coming right back into form in time for the Aintree Grand National meeting, which has happened before? He's had, well, his last few Cheltenhams haven't been great, in fairness, but they've then bounced back and done really, really well at the Aintree meeting. So that's something to keep an eye on. Eldorado Allen actually picked up about 28 grand for second place here. Very well ridden by Harry in order to pick up the pieces. It's the second time he's been behind Shishkin. You can see here another career best Racing Post rating. I should say for this results video, I'm within GG's gold, and I can kind of see all these different things in terms of how races have worked out. And Matt has the Racing Post ratings data and top speed figures also. So in terms of over fences, a career best. He has been put up, I think, £3 to 152. again, that looks like it's worth exploiting. He's thoroughly unexposed still in handicaps. He's unexposed in maybe bigger field, stronger pace, and he does run now as if he's worth a go over 2.5 miles to my eyes. It'll be interesting what Tizzard does. The horse was entered in the Grand Annual and another handicap possibly, but they decided to try and pick up the pieces in the Arkle, which did work well, and they picked up a good prize at the same time while giving the horse a bit more experience over fences. So his jumping was generally sound. Whether or not they stick to 16 furlongs or whether or not they aim up Aintree or something at Ayr and look to step him up to 2.5 miles or another race. But I think a mark of 152 they can exploit, especially in handicaps, and given who he's kind of kept bumping into. So that was worth, I think he's worth taking forward, possibly more short term than long term, but you would like to think that Tizzard's going to find something for him over fences soon enough. Captain Guinness ran well. Connections will be pleased that he completed after falling on his start before. This horse, remember, was brought down in the Supreme and when still travelling really well, and he may well have chased home Shishkin that day, you don't know. And obviously the Supreme Novices hurdle, if I just click on that from last year, bigger field, etc., that has worked out rather well, as we can see here. Yeah, Shishkin's obviously 4 from 4. Chantry House won again at the festival, and so on and so forth. So obviously that probably was a deeper Supreme Novices hurdle than this one, but it's just an example of those festival races and festival novice races and various other races, and just how well they can turn out and how well some of these races are worth following. Captain Guinness clearly has more wins in him over fences to me. Again, I'm not sure if his mark's been put up at all or not, but that was a career best over fences on the Racing Post ratings figures. So that's a horse who looks to be progressing. He was very keen on the front end and got into a bit of a scrap with All Mankind. Shishkin was probably always going to win, but they certainly set it up and allowed the likes of Eldorado Allen to pick up the pieces. He never really settled. He was a bit buzzed up. And in that context, the fact that he didn't fall out the back of the TV and he kept going is probably a positive. He generally jumped fairly well, and he was kind of staying on again after the last, so it'll be interesting to see if Connections up him in trip or not. You can see there some of the relations and breeding to 2.5 milers, 3 milers in terms of on the dam side. So whether or not Henry de Bromhead may worthwhile or may try stepping him up in trip, he'll need to settle better obviously on his next start, but you would think he is going to win races and win more chases also, in what could work out to be not too bad form. So that's the Supreme. Then we move on to the Ultima, the grand old servant, Vintage Clouds, winning on his 5th go in the race. All credit to him. I can't say I was that close to him this time, but it wasn't the strongest of renewals. Plenty had a bit to prove in terms of from the handicapping marks, recent form, whether or not they truly got the trip, and back down to his last winning mark in first time cheek pieces, another slight tinker to his wind, and the second run after another wind op, he has jumped and galloped them silly. Sue Smith reports him as being as good as form as he's ever been at home, and the latest wind op seems to have helped, and it looks like he may go back to the Scottish national, and he might be interesting in that, but I say that without knowing the runners and riders at this stage. For all you know, he's obviously not getting any younger, and this was probably the race to catch him, but I should think they'll keep him in training for another year. He doesn't show any signs of stopping, and he will pop up again at some point in the months and maybe the next season to come as well. Happy Go Lucky was okay. He was I think another summer at grass he could be even better next season. He generally travelled well, he stayed okay. The odd scrappy jump, it was his first run in 90 days. Sipage ran a strange race, losing his position and then staying on again. So yeah, I don't know what they're going to do with him. He is now, I suppose, always open to attack from something a bit better treated. Maybe his mark needs to come down again, but he is only 9. Venetia will get more wins from him. Alnadam travelled well until a point, and he was up there until kind of 2-3 out, I think, before getting tired. That run would suggest, at least for this stage in his career, he didn't see the trip out. Maybe he wanted the ground softer, I'm not sure. But, you know, he travelled and jumped well for a time. And again, he's going to be one who's got something okay, half decent in him, especially next season. Maybe they'll look at the drop-in trip, the kind of 2.5 miles, the likes of the Caspian Caviar Gold Cups, and those kind of 2 mile 4, 2 mile 5 big handicaps that happen at Cheltenham before Christmas. Maybe they'll eye something, maybe they'll eye one of those up. And he could be the yard's the new kind of spirit of the games for these kind of top competitive handicaps. The two I will probably take forward, given how they travelled through this, if you go and watch the video back, is Nietzsche for Brian Ellison. I'm not 100% sure that he saw the trip out, but he did generally move well. Again, his first run in 94 days. He was still travelling, hadn't really been asked after the third fence. It was the furthest he's run over. Again, he might like better ground. You look at these kind of Weatherby races here, this race behind Bartlett Knoll here, you know, possibly suggesting 2.5 miles on a stiffer track, slight drop down in class. He's only 134, he is 8. This was only his, obviously he's kind of raced in multiple codes, including on the flat, but he's 2 from 10, 6 places over fences. If I look at handicap chases, he's 0 from 5, 4 places. This was the first time he hasn't placed in a handicap chase. So Brian Ellison will be thinking he can do, you know, this market of 134 or so is workable. Maybe not quite over this far, maybe slightly better ground, slight drop in trip. But he moved well through this, and first run in 94 days. Whether or not this is actually a prep for something at Aintree or Ayr or somewhere else, I'm not sure. But I think he's worth keeping an eye on. He seems to have got his act together over fences, and looks like they could win something. Maybe a smaller field, more aggressive ride. As an idea, Admiral Secret, who I had a dart on at a big price to scratch the itch to see whether or not he would stay. It was his first go over 3 miles, I suppose, doing that at the Cheltenham Festival, and a fairly testing track was always going to be a big question for him. But if you watch the race back, he travelled the best of anything through it, to my eyes. Smooth, he jumped well, he travelled well, he moved like a horse who was still well handicapped off a mark of 142. He came into this on the back of a couple of career bests in terms of his performance to Racing Post ratings. This Warwick race I thought was decent, a class 2 that hasn't quite worked out well since, although a fair few of those may have kind of bumped into the handicapper now. But he looked like, now they've worked him out, they pony him down to the start. He did have a phase of refusing. Alan Johns gets on really well with him. But he travelled and moved through this as if he has something, you know, on decent ground. Soft is fine, but doesn't want any worse maybe. But he's a good mover, maybe 2.5 miles or 2.5 miles of stiffer track, or maybe a flat 3 miles. I wouldn't kind of discount him from. But he does move, and he's been very consistent this season, as if he's still got a handicap chasing him somewhere, and possibly a half decent one at class 2, maybe grade 3 level before the season is out. So he's one to keep an eye on for me. They're the kind of couple I may take forward from this, and as well as those various other comments from the Ultima. But yeah, it was great to see Vintage Clouds do that, even though he didn't carry any of my money. Who else do I want to mention here in the Champion Hurdle? Obviously, Honeysuckle put up a very impressive performance. Sharjah did what Sharjah does and kind of ran on into the places. Aspire Tower may be the one to take forward. It was a big run for a 5-year-old. I think he ran best of the younger brigade in this. Again, he over-raced and was a bit keen and was a bit buzzy. He's clearly got some half-decent form at graded level. And, you know, if he learns to drop his head a bit, I also thought he ran as if, well, obviously, as if Connections, or whether or not Connections would consider running him over 2.5, I'm not sure. This was his first run in 77 days. Again, even though beat 11 lengths technically on Racing Post rating figures, I think that was a career best, certainly from the form you can see there. So that would indicate a horse progressing, which is always a positive. He is only 5. There's probably a fair bit of development to come. I'm not sure what their plans with him are, whether or not fencing and jumping is on the agenda for next season, say. But he did stay on after the last again, having kind of been up there near the front, been a bit too keen, then lost his place, outpaced, possibly obviously a bit outclassed as well, but then did stay on again. So Aspire Tower, he's a nice horse. And we'll have more wins in him, and it'll be interesting to see what Connections do. But on that evidence, he sort of suggested, as he did the run before when he kept on as well, that he may be worth a step up in trip. So he's one to keep an eye on for the rest of the season and into next. So that was my horse to take from the Champion Hurdle. The Boodles, sorry, not the Boodles yet, the Mares Hurdle, there was nothing too much for me to take from this in terms of the future. A decent finish, decent race, and obviously Black Tears had a very good kind of festival and Cheltenham record, and stayed very well and just got the better of Concertista in the Dying Strides, but I don't really want to dwell on that race for too long. Jeff Kidder ran well for Canny Noel Mead, who I don't think had too many runners through the week, but he has been having a half decent season. I suppose, 80 to 1 with hindsight, it's always easy to look back. Now the Boodles are what was the Fred Winter. Generally pays to focus on some bigger price horses, and yet another winner in the 25 plus to 50 plus range. I suppose this is an example of how a big field, decent ground, a stiff track, a proper gallop, how that can, especially younger horses, bring them forward again and make them leave behind previous form and show a jolt of improvement, which he certainly did. Again, I wasn't as close as I like to be with any winner at the Cheltenham Festival. But again, this is another one of those, form on decent ground, especially on the flat. So some kind of educated thinking or not educated guesswork, but pondering that at some point a return to better ground may see an improved performance. He then won, he ran well in a big field maiden hurdle, 16th furlong at Fairyhouse, 1 going away. That was a career best over jumps, kind of RPR at the time. He then ran in this grade 2, which at the time, the winner was then well fancied for the Triumph, which would follow a few days later. If you actually watch that back, he was kind of bang there 2 out, and then just got outpaced a bit, but he stayed on well enough. He was only beaten 8 lengths, and again, graded level. He had the likes of Buston in front, but he overturned that form in this bigger field, better ground, stronger pace, stiffer track as well. And yes, I probably overlooked that run more so than I should have done. But another example of, some small field graded hurdle form, running well to a point, especially if you watch that video back, not beaten far, and that idea of, bigger field, stronger pace, better ground, given some of his form down here, inspiring a kind of better performance within these conditions. And that's a general profile to look at in festival and graded and class 2 handicap hurdles, especially big field, decent ground, when the horses may have been performing with credit in softer ground, or maybe not even performing with credit in softer ground, but bouncing back when hitting better ground, especially if they've got some older form, which may indicate they want as such. And like I said, the idea of small field novices and small field hurdle races, half decent level as well, but transforming again, step into handicap company and this type of race conditions and the hustle and bustle, tapping into stamina, maybe even Connections didn't know existed, and from a decent handicap mark. So he did that well and powered up the hill. That's always a sort of profile to look for in kind of these sorts of races. Who would I want to take from it? Obviously the Paul Nicholls horse was kind of the talking horse of the race. He ran really well, given he ran for most of the race fairly keen. The choke was out a bit, I think, and yeah, he's clearly a nice horse and one to watch and one to take moving forwards. He grows up and he gets bigger and more mature, and I suspect he'll be back at the festival at some point in some guise, but there's plenty of water under the bridge to follow in the year that comes, but he's clearly a nice animal, and you know, Paul Nicholls will do well with him, and it'll be interesting to see what he does. I fancied Sage Advice each way, ran well, thankfully clung on for 6th. He was actually nearly ahead at the last. If you watch that back, he's cruised around, he's jumped well. I just don't think he's got up the hill. And I wouldn't be surprised if Dr. Newland returns him to a flatter track. Definitely looks like an Aintree on it. Aintree may come too soon, but maybe an air horse at the Scottish National Meeting or somewhere else, or Haydock, Newbury, tracks like that. You know, he's got a bit of speed and a bit of pace about him. He wants decent ground. He might be better again for better ground. Well, I think he, you know, he's got good performances with good in the going. And he moved well there, and I think they'll do something with him. Obviously, Dr. Newland's very canny, a mark of 127. I thought that was a decent performance. Obviously, in time, we will see how well this race turns out. Obviously, with 4-year-olds, it can go a couple of ways. They can get lost as this year and into next season goes, and then it's about the season after that. So it will be interesting to see. But I'd like to think Sage Advice was just, well, I got a return from it and made a profit on him in the race, but I would like to think I may do so again at some point in the future. I suppose they're the couple I think I would mention from this, but as always, these races are worth watching back, seeing where the pace was, whether you thought they were well run, was something poorly positioned, etc. And with that said, well, I'll just jump on to the National Hunt Chase, where I fancied Remastered at kind of 8.5. He didn't run well. He lobbed along on the front end. It looks like the ground dried out for him. That was a bit of a question, I suppose. Big knee action, hits the ground hard, and yeah, so he's one for next season. I'm convinced he's going to make up. He's already a half-decent chaser, but kind of 24 to 26 furlongs. He's got some more maturing to do. A mark of 146, I think, is going to look very workable at some point. I don't know if they're going to run him again this season or what their plan is. He didn't quite stay that trip, but he certainly he jumped and travelled well on the whole. He was a bit kind of buzzy as well at times. But yeah, kind of 3 miles, 3 mile 1. 3 mile 2, softer ground. Whether or not he makes up into a kind of Ultima horse, but it could be that he develops further through the rest of this season and into next, and may well go through and past handicaps. We shall see, but he's definitely a staying chaser worth keeping an eye on for me. This kind of form with D Machine will look quite good, I think, in time, and yeah, he's one to take forward from that for the future. So that was day 1. Moving on to day 2, and I've spent 20 odd minutes on the first bit there. What do I want to whiz through here? Nothing really much in the Ballymore. Obviously, Bob Ollinger looks like a future star and machine, and he is the classic. Whatever he does over hurdles is a bonus, I think, because he could be some chaser with some pretty good point-to-point form. Fiddler on the Roof from the Brown Advisory Novices Chase. I should think the connections of late this exhibition may be annoyed that they actually, well, whether bottled it's the right phrase, I'm not sure, but Monkfish wasn't himself. He was scrappy at his fences. He was looking around at everything. There wasn't really a proper Grade 1 horse to face him here, and I would say he's got away with this. And if latest exhibition was here, he may have given him something to think about. Fiddler on the Roof ran another decent race. He is, you know, he's been consistent over fences. Again, tongue tie, first run in 60 days. Obviously, Monkfish wasn't his best, but look at that RPR, a clear career best, 162. His mark has been bumped up to 152 also, so up £4. That's going to look workable. You know, he's got this next destination form here, and he obviously ran well chasing home Galvin in the National Hunt Chase on day 1. He does just run if he wants a trip, and he wasn't stopping really come the line here. What kind of horse he makes up into, and whether or not he's going to be a kind of longer term Irish national type, I don't know. He's probably bred for a bit of speed, isn't he? So maybe not. But we shall see. He runs as if he's got something over kind of 24, 26 furlongs, maybe stepping into handicap company from a mark in the low 150s. But yeah, he looks, you know, he's consistent. His jumping's getting better, and you would think Tizzard's going to find the key with him. Whether or not he's going to be apprised to do so on any start soon, we shall see. Let me jump over to the Coral Cup. If you watch this back, heaven help us, Dictated ran a cracker, another mare winning, and I'll get onto those in a moment. Again, I was well, no, I looked back through my notes and kind of was on a long list of 5 or 6 that interested me in this race, but I didn't quite get there to backing her, which was annoying. Unexposed in handicaps at the time, now 2 from 2, but that was her first handicap start. Was last time out at Leopardstown. I'll get on to some kind of thoughts on the Irish kind of handicap form in a moment, but when I go on to the Grand Annual. But so she arrived in form, back of a win, second start in cheek pieces. So the first time cheek pieces, and I maybe overlooked that, the idea that she would step forward again because she's unexposed in handicap hurdles, and second run in cheek pieces. That was a 53k pot, 20 runner race. Getting into your head, and my head certainly, that every big field Irish handicap, certainly at that level, is just on a different level, different level to generally to UK handicaps at the moment, given the strength in depth. She'd been chasing some graded form, obviously used to graded, experienced graded pace. She did run fairly well in that Supreme, and was bashed about a couple of times and knocked about a few times as well, if you go and watch that back. So again, festival form, novice hurdle form at graded level, and a bit like what I said about previous races and horses in terms of handicap hurdles, and then stepping into handicap hurdles, bigger field, strong pace. She obviously made all this time, better ground as well, and a reason that she might step forward because she's going to face better ground. I was actually probably a bit too dismissive of this form. I was thinking at the time the race hadn't worked out well, but in third on here was a mare who then won the Mare Novices the next day. The festival was at the Friday, and then so would step forward again. The race at the time was kind of, no winners had come out of it from a kind of 11 who'd raced since, but yes, I underestimated that ability to step forward again and improve again for a step up in trip, better ground, stiffer track again. And that was, there's a few observations there. And again, another mare in form. So lightly raced in handicaps, pretty consistent, some graded novice form, arriving in form, etc. So, and that was on the back of a career best RPR as well against the mark at the time, up to 138. Would that underestimate her? And it certainly did. So credit to connections there. Always something to learn. Who would I want to take forward from this? Would be well, obviously the Nicky Henderson horse, so that's probably going to be a bit obvious. Blue Sari was probably going to get swallowed. I'm not quite sure when coming down after the last, but he moved like he's he's going to do some damage from this mark in a handicap hurdle at some point. So Blue Sari is clearly one to keep an eye on. He was behind Envoy Allen in the champion bumper of 2019. Some decent form, maiden hurdle. He'd been in the places certainly, and he moved really well. So he's one to take forward. Hopefully that fall, it was more a stumble after the last and kind of coming down. Not sure if it was tired or what, not quite sure. Craig Nish ran really well, travelled really well. He got mashed up on a bend. Tom Cannon had to switch him out. He would have preferred a much stronger pace. He was probably poorly conditioned given how that race worked out. He ran, well, not better than I thought he did. I wasn't 100% sure if he was still well handicapped or how obviously he would take to the track. And given that this race here hadn't worked out too well, but again, he moved and finished off his race. This was the furthest he's run over. It didn't look, well, I wouldn't be surprised if in time he might try 3 miles. I'm not quite sure what Nicky Henderson's plans are, but again, he moved like he has got something in him in a handicap from 139, and maybe one of the better treated British handicap hurdlers at kind of class 1-2 graded handicap hurdle level. So he's certainly one to keep an eye on, although probably won't be missed next time. I thought Guard Your Dreams ran well again, having been poorly positioned and run well at Newbury. He looked like he took up the step and trip well. I mean, you know, the owners of Cogri, Cogri's owners, he looks like on some breeding that he may be a chaser of the future and possibly over further. So maybe not one for handicap hurdles this year, but into novice handicap chases into next season. Maybe be interesting to see what the team do with him. But he's got some solid form to his name in handicaps, and he seems to have handled the better ground fine, even though he's got form on softer. So he looks a versatile horse, and he's one maybe into next season, one to wait for fences possibly. Who else was interesting in this race? Seo, that's who I want to mention. And he was poorly positioned. Well, he was out the back towards the rear. He did best of those horses who were held up in this race. So that's always something to keep an eye on. Like I said, the winner dictated and made all, but he did best of those who were near the back, and he stayed on and he wasn't stopping at the line. And this would suggest maybe 3 miles, decent ground. I think the ground might be important to him. Some of his better runs have had good in the going. So maybe there's something at Punchestown or the Fairyhouse Irish Grand National Meeting, or that may come too soon. Galway, I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if they give him a crack over 3 miles. Although you can see there he's kind of flatbread. But he looks like he's got something else in him on the evidence of that form, and we shall see how this Coral Cup works out. But the winner was unexposed, Craig Nish was unexposed, Blue Surrey was probably going to be in the places unexposed, so his form could work out okay. He would have preferred a stronger pace over that trip given how things worked out, but he looked like a mark of 143 is not insurmountable, and this you can see fairly lightly raced. And in handicaps, well, that was his 7th handicap hurdle. Maybe, yeah, we shall see. You know, he didn't run too well there. That was one of his better runs, and actually a career best in handicap hurdles on Racing Post ratings. So yeah, we shall see if Willie Mullins can do anything with him. Although he has had a few goes in handicap hurdles, but I wouldn't mind 3 miles decent ground. We shall see. So that's what I want to say on that race, I think. What else have we got left as I just flick through some of these others, as I trundle around half an hour? Not much I want to say on the Champion Chase. Another gritty, superb performance from Put the Kettle On. Shoe Royale was obviously tanking still when Rouge Vif hampered him on a bend. He looks like he's still got something in him this season based on how he moved through that. Again, Aintree, Air, we shall see what Alan King may find, but he moved through that well. And might be the one from that to take for the rest of this season at least, obviously. Tiger Royal bounced back to something like his best in the cross country. Yeah, his best Racing Post rating for quite a time. Such a shame they've pulled him out of the Grand National. We shall see where he turns up next. Talk of the Aintree Bowl up against a Plutard, possibly a tilt at the Irish Grand National, probably with a fair weight on his back. But that was an okay, well, good to see him bounce back to form. The Grand Annual is the last race I think I will touch on. There's nothing I want to say about the Champion Bumper. The Grand Annual, before I just switch over and touch on some of the mares. What do I want to say about this race? Eblio came from really far back, and that was an impressive performance given he looked like he was rushed off his feet from flagfall. He probably wanted the ground a bit softer. He may well have wanted it to slow everything down a bit, but again, another career best. I'm not sure if he's been put up a couple of pounds. That wouldn't surprise me on the back of that. But he moved through that and finished that race off as if he could still have another handicap chase in him somewhere. I mean, very consistent. 4 from 8 places. And those horses that like winning and like placing are always worth keeping on side. And it looks like he's still improving. So he's a horse worth keeping an eye on for the future. Given where he came from and some of the trouble he had to negate, and the fact he looked like he was flat out from the start, that was a pretty impressive effort. Fair play to Sky Pirate. I wasn't sure if he was if the handicapper had him or not, but just got away with it. N2Cast, the one I'll just touch on more so for learning points more generally. I mean, he made any backers of his will be ruining the error he made at the second last, and I suspect that probably has cost him. Now, he came into this, he hadn't been messed around with, he'd been honestly campaigned to my eyes, he'd been running his race, he'd been banged there over the last couple of fences in some good handicaps. I wondered if 138 was kind of whether or not he would have enough in hand, but he moved through it and, you know, performed as if he did, obviously. But yeah, just a general point, out with kind of that Heaven Help Us as well, and various other different handicap form. The Irish handicap form just looks miles ahead of the British handicap form, more competitive, bigger fields, run at a more relentless pace. You know, horses hardier, maybe having to learn to jump in and around horses. You know, maybe they're more street smart, and that's one of the reasons for their performances, especially in handicaps. They're obviously clearly well handicapped. Maybe there's been some discussion whether the UK runners are overrated and our ratings are too high, rather than the Irish being too low. But they do seem to, some of them, come here more battle hard. And you know, something for me to take away is just Irish handicap form, even when you're placing and beaten, is still really, really solid. These are really, really good races, especially from an experience perspective from the horses, building up experience. But this is a horse who's got good form in big fields and clearly relishes a decent pace. But yeah, that's something for me to take away there. On the slopes, ran well, and again, he's just kind of given the impression he's probably worth a step back up in trip at some point. You know, he ran well for a time. I'm not quite sure if the handicapper's got him or not. Maybe I'd have liked to have seen him finish his race off a bit better there if you're thinking about moving him back up in trip, but he will find weaker handicaps than this, of course. Orjunda Somoza I thought was interesting at the time at a big price, but didn't really run well. I suppose he's had a fair few goes, well, to a point had a fair few goes over chases, 1 from 10 in handicap chases. He hasn't been with Gordon Elliott very long. This was his 5th run for Elliott. I thought he wanted decent ground. He was just outpaced and never really jumped, which I didn't imagine. I thought they'd try and run him close to the pace. He was badly hampered when not far off Iblio. Whether or not he'd have plugged on into a distant place, I don't really know. I thought he wanted decent ground. If you look back at some of these performances, maybe he needs 2.5 miles now, but I thought of 136 there could be more to come, especially if Elliott got a bit of improvement from him. He ran well here and wasn't too far off N2Cas in this race at Leopardstown, which made me think and wonder about the price disparity on the day. But in any case, he's a chaser I will keep an eye on, because I think Elliott will find a win for him somewhere. Maybe he does need to go up in trip now. I'm not sure, but that was a slightly disappointing run. Not that Fusey. He ran well to a point without, I'm not quite sure, getting up the hill necessarily. Is he one for a flatter track, or was he a bit flat out for a bit too long? Maybe he wants further. But again, he moved well, and he's unexposed in handicap chases. And I'd have thought the Skeltons off 137 will find something for him at some point as well. If I just look at handicap chases here, yeah, that was only his 4th handicap chase. 1st in a proper big field, really. So, you know, that he'll learn from that experience. He moved well and travelled well, maybe over raced a little bit, but he's one to take forward also. So in terms of horses to know, I think I've mentioned what I want to do there. I'm ticking around to 38 minutes. What I do want to do quickly is jump over to horse race base. I'm going to do system building software here. I want to add festival. I want to add sex in the race, and I want to add the sex of the horse. Let me just pick Cheltenham there. I want mixed sex races, and I want mares and fillies. And let me just go here. So this is the Cheltenham Festival, fillies and mares in races open to all sexes, so not mares and fillies only. Obviously that would make this research a bit pointless. And let's just look at that, you know, 10 from 49 the last 2 years now, 17 places. A ridiculous amount of profit to Betfair starting price, given that it was what 2, 3, 4, 5, I think, from about 101 or so horses in the 8 or so festivals that came before that. Is this a trend? Possibly. There's obviously been shifts in the mares program where they've tried to increase incentives, increase the mares program, so more mares. There's now a market for mares, so you're seeing better mares coming through and being bred and staying in training, and that may be having some impact, because these stats are starting to look like that is a trend. if I just break down for the last couple of seasons, 21, 22, or the last two festivals, I should say, you can look at race types here, and you can see, you know, in 5 of the winners have been in handicaps. They obviously get, the mares and fillies get some allowances in these all-sex races, but you can see some of the stats there. But yeah, and the handicaps is interesting, especially handicap hurdles. So that's something to keep an eye on. Whether or not it's a trend or not, we shall see. But I do not want to be missing out on the mares next year, which I kind of sort of did this year, more for me. But yeah, so, you know, there's some impressive stats. There's 3 things I can dig down within those that you may wish to note down for the Cheltenham Festival for next season. Those that won last time out are now 7 from 16, 9 places, plus 109 Betfair starting price. So that's something to note down. Those that had experience at Cheltenham, that had run at Cheltenham before, 1 from 16 those that hadn't. So if you ignore those and just look at those that had course form in some form, not necessarily the festival, but had run at Cheltenham before, you can see the stats for those there. So that's something to take away as well. And finally, looking at those who had run the highest class they'd run at, so indicating that connections may think they're half decent, and whether or not they end up in handicaps, whatever, but the fact they've even run in races like this may be some indication. And those that had run at that level at some point in their career, and then the Cheltenham Festival, yes, filly and mare mixed sex races, 10 from 37 the last 2 festivals, as you can see there, and the qualifiers for those and the winners, heaven help us, put the kettle on Mrs. Milne and Mount Ida. So yeah, something there to not, I will not miss the mares in future years. Or certainly as a little micro angle just to back for change, until it may be, you know, next year will probably be 0 from 20 now, having said all this, but it could well be a trend. Maybe something about the festival and these mares, when they're on it and they're in form and they're aggressive and they're always competitive and they like a scrap, maybe more so than some of the boys, could be something in that as well. And the fact they're still being kept in training rather than being sent off to the paddocks may indicate that they're above ability, and the connections clearly think they're worth persevering with for prize money and to get black type and for future breeding potential. So there's quite a lot of logic there for why that is something to keep an eye on moving forwards. But having said this will be a quick video, I'm ticking around to 42 minutes and I think I've gone on for long enough. But hopefully if you've got to the end, then thank you. Hopefully I've said something of use for you. But until the next time, when I'll come back with one looking at days 3 and 4 and maybe some other stats, some odd sire stats, especially Jeremy, who had another great week and that looks like a trend as well, and various other bits and pieces. But yes, until the next time, thanks for watching. This is Josh saying bye for now and see you soon. Although actually, before I go, if you do want to join the Racing to Profit hordes through to the end of the season, click the link below this video. If you're watching this within YouTube, you can join us through to the end of the season. We've won in the last week, the tips on the blog won about 55 points since Saturday the 13th of March in the last kind of 10, 12, 13 days, which is superb, a proper little hot spell for us. We've got Aintree to come, the Punchestown Festival to come, the Irish National, the Scottish Grand National meeting, loads of great jumps racing to come before the 2nd of May. So yeah, if you'd like to join us all just for a one-off fee through to the end of the season, you can click the link below this video and have a look around that page, and hopefully the Racing to Profit existing members and masses will see you on the inside soon. But whether or not you do, whatever, thanks for watching this video. Hopefully you've got something useful from it. Until the next time, this is Josh saying bye for now.